They say a man's vehicle carries his story, not just his weight, but his years. For me, that story sat on four squeaky wheels and a body lined with scratches older than my neighbor's confidence. It was an old 1985 pickup, chipped paint, cracked leather seats, and a stubborn engine that still roared louder than half the new ones on the street. To outsiders, it was junk. To me, it was a promise I made to myself and to my late wife, Anna, that I'd keep driving it till the day my hands stopped shaking enough to turn the key. Studio microphone, welcome to my channel, friends. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and tap that bell icon so you never miss stories that remind us. Respect doesn't come from what shines, it comes from what lasts. My name's Henry, 62, retired mechanic, living in a quiet suburban lane where people measured worth by the size of their house and the shine of their car. And right next door lived Kyle Thompson, early 30s, loud, successful, and allergic to humility. He moved in 2 years ago, fresh from some tech startup deal, driving a car so polished it reflected the sky better than the sky itself. The first time he saw my truck, he smirked and said, "That thing still runs? Man, they should put it in a museum." I smiled, wiped the grease from my hands, and said, "It runs just fine. It's been through more storms than that car of yours ever will." He laughed. "Yeah, but mine has Wi-Fi." I wanted to tell him that engines don't need Wi-Fi to have heart, but I didn't. Because silence is the best teacher time ever made. It didn't stop there. Every weekend, he'd wash his car like it was a newborn baby, and every weekend, he'd look over at my truck and say something like, "Hey, Henry, you ever think of upgrading? That thing looks like it belongs in a scrapyard." I'd just smile. Old things still work if you treat them right. He'd laugh and shake his head. Man, nostalgia doesn't pay for gas. Maybe he was right, but nostalgia pays in ways money never could. One afternoon, I saw him standing by his car, hood open, frowning. "Trouble?" I asked, walking over. He sighed. "Yeah, the engine's dead. Some sensor issue." I looked, smiled a little. All this tech, and it can't even tell you what's wrong without a computer. He grinned half-heartedly. "Guess it's too smart for its own good." I leaned over, checked the engine, and said, "If you ever need a hand, you know where I live." He chuckled. "Thanks, Henry, but I'll stick with professionals. No offense." "None taken," I said, though deep down I could hear Anna's voice saying, "Pride is loud until it needs help." Weeks passed, and the insults became jokes. Little ones at barbecues, block parties, even at mail time. "Henry, when's your truck retiring?" "Henry, that thing run on faith now?" I smiled through all of it. Because that truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was the last piece of my life with Anna. We drove it across the country for our honeymoon, hauled furniture when we bought our first home, and even slept in it once when we got caught in a thunderstorm miles from anywhere. She used to say, "As long as this truck runs, Henry, we'll always find our way back home." Now she was gone, and that truck was all I had left of her voice. Then came the night that changed everything. The storm was fierce, the kind that rattled windows and made streetlights flicker like ghosts. Thunder rolled like the sky was angry at someone. And in the middle of it, I heard a banging on my door, desperate, panicked. I opened it to see Kyle, drenched, trembling, eyes wide with fear. "Henry," he gasped, "my car, it's stuck halfway down the hill. The engine's dead. My wife's trapped inside." I grabbed my coat, keys, and flashlight, and as I looked at my old truck sitting in the driveway, rain bouncing off its hood, I whispered under my breath, "Guess it's time for one last ride, old friend." Rain was coming down in sheets, hard enough to blur the world into streaks of gray. The thunder followed close, rolling mean and restless. But the old truck? She woke up like she'd just been waiting for her cue. The engine grumbled once, twice, then roared alive, that deep, throaty growl that felt more like a heartbeat than a machine. I swear if Anna could have seen it, she would have smiled. Kyle stood there shivering, eyes wide as lightning split the sky. "You sure that thing will make it?" he shouted over the storm. I looked at him and said, "She's seen worse." We climbed in, him fumbling with the seatbelt, me gripping the wheel like an old soldier returning to war. The wipers struggled against the rain, each swipe just buying us another glimpse of the flooded street. His voice was shaking. My wife, she's halfway down the slope, water's rising. Hold on, I said, shifting gears. The tires groaned, mud flying behind us. The old truck growled forward, heavy but sure-footed, like it still remembered every dirt road we'd ever taken. The storm was angry, but my girl didn't care. Every puddle we hit sounded like applause from the ghosts of the roads we'd survived before. When we reached the hill, I saw it. Kyle's shiny new car, nose deep in the ditch, headlights flickering like a dying heartbeat. Inside, through the rain, I could just make out his wife, terrified, clutching the steering wheel, water already reaching the doorframe. Seatbelts on, I said, cutting the engine near the top. We'll back her down steady. Kyle looked at me, soaked pale. You can't be serious. This hill's slick as ice. I gave him a small grin. That's why you brought me, kid. I eased the truck into reverse. The tires slipped again. But she held her ground, like she always did. I could hear the rain pounding the roof like a drum, smell the wet earth, feel the old steering wheel trembling under my palms. Every inch down that hill was a memory of storms, of miles, of promises that never rusted. When we reached the car, I told Kyle, stay put. I jumped out, rope in hand, boots sinking into the mud. The water was freezing, biting at my legs, but adrenaline burned hotter. His wife's voice came through the glass, muffled sobs and fear. It's okay, I shouted. You're safe now. I looped the rope around the front axle of her car, the rain soaking through my jacket, thunder cracking like it was cheering us on. Kyle jumped out to help, slipping and catching himself, eyes full of regret and panic. Henry, what do I do? I shouted back, you hold the light steady and trust the old man you laughed at. When I climbed back into the driver's seat, my heart was racing, but steady. I threw the truck into gear and said softly, come on, girl, one more time. The tires spun, mud flying, the whole truck shaking like it was fighting gravity itself. Then traction. Slowly, stubbornly, she began to pull. The rope tightened, creaked, then groaned. The car shifted, inch by inch, crawling out of the ditch like something reborn. Kyle's wife was crying, not from fear now, but relief. And through the windshield between flashes of lightning, I saw it, the reflection of my old truck drenched in rain, lights blazing through the darkness. A relic, they called her. But tonight, she was a savior. When we finally reached flat ground, Kyle ran to his wife, pulling her into his arms, both of them soaked but alive. I shut off the engine, leaned back, and just listened to the rain ease off. The sound softening, like even the sky had run out of anger. Kyle walked up slowly, tears mixing with the rain. He looked at me like he'd never really seen me before. Henry, I don't even know what to say. I smiled faintly, brushing mud off my sleeve. Say thank you to her, I said, patting the truck's hood. She's the one who did the heavy lifting. He laughed through the tears. Guess the old girl's not so outdated after all. I met his eyes. Never was. You just weren't old enough to understand. The next morning, the sky was washed clean, that soft kind of blue that only shows up after a night that tried to break everything. The birds were back, the street smelled like wet earth, and my old truck sat there in the driveway, covered in dried mud, tired but proud. I stood there, with a cup of coffee, staring at it. It looked beaten up, sure, but it also looked alive. Every scratch had a story, every dent a memory. Last night, it had written one more. Around 9 a.m., someone knocked. When I opened the door, there was Kyle. Different. No sunglasses, no polished smile, no designer jacket, just a man who hadn't slept. His eyes were swollen, his clothes still smelled of rain. He held a small box in his hands. I brought breakfast, he said, awkwardly. You probably didn't eat yet. I smiled. You didn't have to. I know, he said quietly, but I wanted to. He followed me inside, glancing around the small house like he was seeing it for the first time, tools hanging on the wall, an old photo of Anna by the mantel, and that faint smell of oil and coffee that never really left this place. He set the box down on the table, pancakes still warm. We sat in silence for a while. He finally spoke. "Henry, I owe you more than I can ever repay." I took a sip of coffee, calm. "You don't owe me anything, Kyle. You just learned something money can't buy." He nodded slowly. "Respect." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." He hesitated, then said, "Last night when you pulled us out, I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I laughed at that truck and at you. I thought you held on to it because you couldn't move on." I looked out the window, eyes softening. "I hold on to it because she's the only thing that still remembers her." "Anna?" he asked gently. I nodded. "We built this life with that truck. Every mile, every storm, every breakdown, she was there. You don't throw away something that's been with you through love, loss, and everything in between." Kyle swallowed hard, guilt heavy in his eyes. I didn't understand that. I kept chasing shiny things. Thought the old stuff just slowed people down. I chuckled quietly. "That's what you thinks. But sometimes the old stuff, it's what keeps you grounded." He looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "Henry, I want to fix your truck. Properly. Paint, parts, everything. My expense." I shook my head gently. "She's fine the way she is." "I insist," he said, voice trembling. "Let me do this, not to pay you back, but to remind myself what matters." I looked at him, really looked. The arrogance was gone. What stood there now was a man who'd learned the difference between pride and value. "All right," I said finally, "but you're not paying anyone to do it. You're helping me do it yourself." He blinked. "Me? I don't even know how to change a tire." I smirked. "Then it's about time you learned. Grab your jacket, lesson starts now." We spent the next few hours in the garage. I showed him how to change oil, how to listen to an engine, how to feel when something was wrong instead of waiting for a light to flash on a dashboard. He struggled, cursed under his breath, got his hands dirty, and for the first time he laughed without ego. A real laugh. At one point he looked up at me, grease on his cheek, and said, "Man, I used to think you were stuck in the past. But I think the truth is I was just scared of it." "Scared?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, scared that maybe all my progress didn't mean anything if I couldn't fix something with my own hands." I smiled. "Then you're learning faster than I expected." By the end of the afternoon, the truck looked different, cleaner, shinier, and somehow prouder. Kyle wiped his hands, still breathing hard from the work, and said, "She deserves better than my jokes." I chuckled. "She's had worse. But she forgives easy." He smiled, eyes soft. "Guess I've got a lot to learn from both of you." When he left that evening, the sun was dipping behind the trees, painting the world in gold again, just like it had the night before the storm. I watched him go, shoulders lighter, steps slower. And when I turned back toward the truck, I swore I saw Anna's reflection in the window, smiling. A few days passed after the storm, and things went back to normal. Or at least they tried to. The street was calm again. The sky had forgotten how dark it once looked. But one thing hadn't gone back to normal: Kyle. He wasn't the same man anymore. No loud music from his backyard, no jokes about my truck when we crossed paths. Now, when he waved, it came with a smile that meant something, and every morning I'd see him standing near his driveway, coffee in hand, just thinking, like he was replaying that night over and over in his head. One Saturday, I heard engines outside. A few of our neighbors had gathered. Kyle had apparently invited them for some neighborhood meet. Usually I'd skip those, but something told me to peek out. There was a large white banner across his driveway. Community Appreciation Barbecue, hosted by Kyle Thompson. I almost laughed. The same man who once said, "I don't mix with the old crowd." But before I could even finish my coffee, there was a knock at the door. Kyle stood there, all smiles, dressed casual, nervous energy buzzing around him. "Hey, Henry, I was hoping you'd come by. There's something I want to show you." I raised an eyebrow. "You got another fancy car to show off?" He grinned shyly. "Not this time. Just come over, please." When I stepped into his driveway, everyone turned. Some smiled politely, others whispered. I could tell they all remembered how Kyle used to mock me. But right there, front and center, under a small tarp, sat a shape I'd know anywhere. He walked over, took a breath, and said, "Before we eat, I want to talk about something and someone." He looked around at the neighbors, his tone steady but soft. "A few nights ago, during the storm, I nearly lost my wife. My car failed, my plans failed, and the only thing that didn't fail was the man I used to laugh at." Gasps, whispers. The neighbors looked between us. He continued, voice cracking a little. "I used to joke about Henry's truck. I called it outdated, called him stubborn. But that night, that same old truck saved our lives." He pulled off the tarp, and there she was. My truck, clean, restored, repainted in her original deep forest green, polished chrome, new headlights, shining like the day I first bought her. The crowd gasped. My throat tightened. Kyle's voice trembled. "I worked with Henry to rebuild her. He taught me everything: patience, pride, and what real strength looks like. So today, I want everyone to see what I see now, not an old man, not an old truck, but legacy." There was silence for a moment. Then, one by one, people started clapping. Softly at first, then louder, till the whole street echoed with it. Kyle turned to me and said, quietly, "I added one small thing. Hope you don't mind." He opened the driver's door, and there, engraved on a small silver plate on the dash, were the words, "For Anna," who never let him stop driving. I froze. My hands trembled as I touched the engraving. It was her name, my wife's. I hadn't heard anyone say it out loud in years. My voice cracked. "How did you know?" Kyle smiled softly. "You told me. Not in words, but in the way you looked at that truck." I turned to him, eyes misty. "You didn't have to do this." He shook his head. "I did. Because I needed to remember that what's old isn't useless. It's just proven." I chuckled, a tear escaping. "You sound like a mechanic now." He grinned. "Guess I had a good teacher." As the crowd thinned, Kyle's wife came up and hugged me. "Thank you for saving us," she whispered. I smiled. "Thank your husband. He saved something too, his heart." Later that night, after everyone left, I sat in that truck alone. Ran my hand over the steering wheel. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear the storm in my memory, the roar of the engine, the weight of fear, the moment it all turned to faith. And somewhere in the soft glow of the dashboard, I felt her, Anna, sitting beside me, smiling like she always did after a long drive. It's strange how quiet life becomes when people finally start listening. A few months had passed since that storm, and in that time, everything around me changed. Not the weather, not the house, the people. Neighbors who once passed me with polite nods now stopped to talk. The same folks who used to joke about that old truck now asked, "Henry, how old's the engine? Think she could handle a road trip?" And every time I'd smile and say, "She's older than your kids, but tougher than their Wi-Fi." They'd laugh, but this time it wasn't mockery, it was respect. Quiet, genuine, and long overdue. Kyle started coming by more often, not with sarcasm or flashy stories, but with his sleeves rolled up, ready to work. Sometimes we'd fix little things in the garage. Sometimes we'd just sit there, tools untouched, talking about life, about mistakes, about second chances. He told me one evening, "You know, Henry," after that night, I realized how many things I was trying to outrun. My own father, my guilt, even time. But now, I kind of just want to slow down. I chuckled softly. "That's the trick, kid. You don't slow down to stop living. You slow down so you can start feeling." He smiled at that, the kind of smile people only give when something deep finally makes sense. Then, one morning, a letter came in the mail. Plain white envelope, no return address, just my name written neatly. Inside was a folded brochure that said, "Community Classic Auto Drive Annual Charity Parade." And under it, written in blue ink, "You and the legend are our guests of honor. Kyle." I stared at it for a long minute, then looked out the window at the truck. She sat there shining like she already knew. The idea of driving her through town again, with everyone watching, made my hands tremble, but my heart felt young. The parade day came fast. The streets were lined with people, kids waving flags, old folks sipping coffee, phones out everywhere. I'd polish the truck till she gleamed, her forest green paint catching the sun like it was made for the spotlight. Kyle stood by my side, looking sharp but humble. "You nervous?" he asked, grinning. "Son," I said, climbing into the driver's seat, "I've driven through storms that could swallow this whole town. This is just weather with applause." He laughed, slapped the side of the truck, and said, "Let's show them what outdated looks like." As we rolled down Main Street, people cheered. But it wasn't the kind of cheer for show. It was the kind that carries memory. Little kids pointed, men tipped their hats, and one older woman in the crowd whispered, "That's him. That's the man from the storm." Kyle rode beside me, waving now and then, eyes a little misty. He said softly, "I named my new project after your truck." I glanced at him. "You what?" He nodded, smiling. "It's a startup to help small-town mechanics and retired workers get funding for their skills. We called it Legacy Motors." I froze for a moment. The name hit like a soft punch of pride. Legacy. He'd learned it, really learned it. The parade ended at the town square, and Kyle insisted on one last thing. He climbed onto a small stage, microphone trembling in his hand, and said, "This isn't just about cars. It's about stories, the ones we inherit, the ones we forget, and the ones that remind us who we are." He looked right at me in the crowd, his voice cracking. "Henry taught me that what's built with hands never truly breaks, not even with time." Everyone turned to me, clapping, smiling. But I didn't wave, didn't bow. I just looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "You see that, Anna? He finally gets it." Later that evening, when the crowd was gone and the square was empty, I sat on the truck's hood, watching the sunset burn gold across the sky. Kyle came over, sat beside me, both of us quiet. After a while, he said, "You ever think about selling it?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Sell her? Nah, she's not worth money. She's worth memory." He smiled. "Then let's make sure she never gets forgotten." I looked at him. "How do you mean?" He grinned. "You'll see." A few weeks after the parade, life slowed down again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. The neighbors still waved when I passed by. Kyle still dropped in with that same boyish grin, and the truck, she purred softer now, like she finally knew her work was done. I'd drive her every morning around the same block, coffee in hand, engine humming like an old song. Each turn felt like memory, each mile a heartbeat. And sometimes when the sunlight hit just right, I'd almost see Anna in the passenger seat, her hair catching the breeze, her laugh cutting through the hum of the road. She used to say, "Henry, you'll never stop driving. Even when the road ends, you'll find another way to keep going." I didn't understand it then. Now I did. One afternoon, Kyle came by, holding a brown envelope and that same nervous smile from months ago. "Hey, old man," he said softly, "mind if I steal you for a drive?" I laughed. "Depends who's driving." He smirked. "You, obviously. You'd never trust me with her keys." He wasn't wrong. We drove out of town toward the open fields where Anna and I used to picnic. The road stretched endless under the golden sky. Quiet, empty, peaceful. Kyle didn't talk much. He just watched the horizon, his face calm but heavy. When we reached the hilltop, he told me to stop. We stepped out, wind brushing against our faces, that perfect evening silence wrapping around us. He handed me the envelope. "Go on. Open it." Inside was a photograph, the old truck shining under the parade lights, with me behind the wheel. Under it, bold letters read, "Legacy Motor Foundation, Henry and Anna Memorial Scholarship." I blinked. "What's this?" He smiled softly. "It's something I started in your name. Every year, we'll fund a mechanic student, someone who reminds me of you, someone who fixes things not for money, but because they care." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. All I managed to whisper was, "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently, "because someday this truck will stop running. But what you taught me, it shouldn't." We stood there for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors too beautiful to last. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel alone. I just felt grateful. I turned to Kyle, smiled, and said, "You've come a long way, kid." He looked at me, eyes wet, and replied, "You showed me the road." When we drove back, the truck moved slower, not tired, just thoughtful. The lights of town flickered ahead, warm and inviting. And as we rolled past the street where it all began, where he once mocked me, where that storm had raged, Kyle reached over and placed his hand on the dash. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not to me, to her, the truck, and maybe to time itself." That night, I parked her in the garage one last time. The keys clicked softly, the metal warm under my fingers. I looked at her, smiled, and said quietly, "Rest easy now, old girl. We've done enough driving." Then I switched off the lights. For the first time, it didn't hurt. It just felt right. Weeks later, Kyle came over again. He told me he'd finally sold his fancy car, said it didn't feel like home. Now he drove something older, simpler, and when he passed by my house every morning, he'd honk twice. Once for me, once for her. Years will pass, engines will change, but on that street, they'll still tell the story of an old man, his truck, and the storm that proved some things never go out of style. And somewhere, in the hum of every road, maybe, just maybe, Anna's still laughing beside me.